Okay, everybody, this is just going to be a short video to talk a little bit about the material that's going to be on exam number 1, and also to talk a little bit about the format and what you should expect when you get into the test so that you can know what's going to happen. So, first of all, this very first exam in statistics does not actually have a lot of math calculations in it, in case you didn't notice, right? We don't have a ton of that going on. And so what we end up focusing on as we start the process of getting into our statistical study is vocabulary. It's really a big portion of this first exam. So for instance, you should know the difference between a population and a sample. You should know how to apply those inside of the problems. When you did the homework, you were asked to tell the difference between those, and so you should know the differences and be able to use those in word problems and so on, like you did in the homework. You should know why we would use a census and why we would use a sample. Like, when are the different situations when I would want one or the other. You should know what a sample statistic is versus a population parameter. You should know all those different things. So go through. There's a ton of vocabulary in this, and you'll end up seeing a bunch of the problems on this first test are actually conceptual problems that test to see whether or not you know that vocabulary. So we've been working for a few weeks now, working on vocabulary, so hopefully everybody's got it worked out. Okay, number 2, and if I'm going too fast or whatever, feel free to pause the video or rewind or take a screenshot or whatever so that you know the things that are going to be on the test. Number 2, basic steps in a statistical study. So that was actually covered like week 1, and if you're not sure, remember it goes something like this. Whenever you start out, you need to identify your goals. You need to know what your population is going to be. You need to know what you're looking at as far as, when I finish this study, I will be able to tell you such and such. For instance, in our favorite color study at A&M Commerce, if we were doing that study, then when I finished, I would hope I would know either the color that the majority of students know, or if there's not a majority, like everybody loves purple or something like that, then at least I would be able to say, these are the top 3 favorite colors, and these are the percentage of the people that I surveyed that liked blue or purple or whatever. Okay, so number 2, we normally will represent or pick a representative sample. Okay, we're not normally doing a census, right? So I need to choose that, and I need to figure out how I'm going to take that. So there's all kinds of sampling techniques. We've talked about them. Go back and look through your notes, go back and do the homework, go back and watch the videos if you haven't done it yet, because there are ways to take that representative sample. So that's step 2. Step 3, collect the raw data. And again, this was in a video like week 1, maybe week 2. But collect your raw data. So what does that mean? That's where I set my table out, and I go around with my survey, and I say, hey, what's your favorite color? Hey, what's your favorite color? And I just literally am able to say 500 people like purple and 300 people like blue, and so on and so forth. Raw data. No calculations have been done to that raw data. Okay, it's just pure and simple. This is what we gathered. Okay, number 4, sample statistics. So this is where I would do a percentage or something, and I use those sample statistics to make inferences about the population. Okay. This is where I'm going to look and say, hey, do I have a margin of error? Do I know how likely it is that the sample statistic that I have gathered, that I have calculated, actually is going to contain, once I have a margin of error, confidence interval, what's going to contain the population parameter. So How likely is it that what I have found actually represents the entire group? That's what we're after there. And then number 5 is conclusions. Okay. And again, this is way more in depth on one of the videos, so go back and watch. But draw your conclusions, determine what, whether or not I have actually answered that question that I had back here in step number 1. So there's all kinds of stuff that goes on inside of a statistical study, but those are the 5 basic steps. And by the way, if I didn't get what I wanted here in steps 4 and 5, then I need to start back over, re-examine my goals, re-pick a new sample somehow. Maybe I have, I don't know, too many football boys in my study and I need to gather up some band guys or something like that, or maybe I need girls in my population, whatever. So go back and re-examine, start over. Start the process all over again. Choose a new sample, go through it again. Okay. Purposes of statistics. Remember that the main purpose for statistics is to make well-informed decisions. We use statistics to make well-informed decisions. Now, whether that's, hey, I'm going to buy this car over here because it has the best gas mileage. Okay, how do you know that? Because the statistics show me that it gets 40 miles per gallon or whatever. That is a piece of data that I have gathered from some pamphlet or whatever that tells me something about that car. And so I have a little statistic about that car, and I have that same statistic about this big truck or something that only gets 12 miles per gallon. Well, then I'm going to use that information to hopefully make a well-informed decision. Now, if you still choose to drive the truck, that's okay. That doesn't mean you didn't make the right choice. Maybe you need a truck. Maybe you're on a farm or something like that, and you need to be able to haul stuff. But you knew going in, hopefully, if you've looked at the statistics, if you've looked at the data, you knew that truck only gets 12 miles per gallon, and so you use that as you go on. Okay. So anyway, look through your notes, but that's the main purpose for studying statistics or for using statistics. Okay, sampling techniques. In our class, there are at least 5 types. Okay, there's random, there's systematic, there's convenience, there's clustering, and there's stratified. So go back and look at that. I'm not going to go into that. I've already made videos on that. So if you didn't watch those videos, go back and watch the sampling techniques video. There was a sampling activity. There's all kinds of homework on this, so make sure you can do it. Difference in the types of statistical studies. Again, there was a video on this, but the big deal there is you need to be able to tell me if something's observational or experimental. Those are the 2 big ones, right? Okay. If it's observational, it means I'm just gathering data that's already there, basically. Like the favorite color. I'm not changing anybody's opinion about favorite color. I'm just gathering up information about what your favorite color is. But experimental, that's, hey, I'm actually trying to affect an outcome, right? So maybe I put fertilizer on half of my tomato plants to hopefully get them to grow taller or whatever. So if I did that, I'm trying to make them grow taller. That is the effect that I'm after. So I am experimenting in that case if I'm using tomatoes and fertilizer and other such thing. Most medical studies are experimental, right? If I'm trying to develop some vaccine for polio or whatever, and I give you the treatment and somebody else the placebo, that's an experiment, okay? A psychological study, if I'm trying to see if listening to music while you do something helps your performance, that is an experiment. So all of those kinds of things. The 8 guidelines for critically evaluating a statistical study. Again, we talked about this in one of the videos. You need to go back and watch it if you're not sure. But it's things like consider the source. Okay. What about do they really have a representative sample? Things like that. So those are things that can really cause something that might have been a good statistical study to go sideways. Okay, so for instance, if I only had a huge group of football boys in my favorite color example, that study, then my sample is not representative of the entire university. So that means that I have not done a good job of getting a representative sample, and that could throw all of my study off. Like I could be doing it for no reason because I just don't have a good sample. So if the sample's not right, then everything else can be messed up. Consider the source. Remember that stuff like the smoking study that was sponsored by the cigarette industry. You know, it's probably going to be biased, so we have to watch out for that. Determining whether or not you should believe a statistical study. So once you see all the stuff from this number 6, the 8 guidelines, then you've got to make a decision. Can I believe that study or not? And how do I do it? And there were some homework questions where you had to say, yeah, I believe this is good, or oh, I'm kind of worried about this one, and here's why. And remember that on a lot of these questions, you're going to have to give me a reason why or justify your answer, right? Just like you did on the homework. It's all written out. So that's why I said on this first test, there's not a lot of math calculations. We're not going to get to math calculations until we get way down here. So for this first test, you're writing English out. You're writing English sentences. So if you don't trust that statistical study, then you better be able to give me your reasoning to write it out in sentence form. So that's what's going on there. And remember, when you're taking a test with me, I can't just read your mind. I can't go, oh, well, what they really mean is such and such and such and such. All I can grade is what you write down. So if you want me to give you credit for something, make sure you write it down. So be thorough with your answers. Don't just assume, oh, Dr. Webster knows what I'm talking about, because no, I don't. I can only grade what's on the paper, okay, or what's on the D2L. So make sure you do that. All right, different types of bias. Remember, there were different ones. There were selection bias and participation bias and experimental bias, or experimenter bias, or researcher bias. So each of those brings its own little different thing in there, and there's a whole entire video on that. So, and we did some homework on it again. So you're getting the theme. If you watched the videos and you did the homework, you should be good for the test. If you didn't watch the videos and you didn't do the homework, you should go back and watch the videos and do the homework, because they prepare me for being able to do this. So again, know the difference between selection, participant, and research bias, researcher bias. Be sure that you can tell me the difference of those. And more so, when I give you an example, this test is a lot of scenarios. So when I write out a little word problem and I say, what's this and this and this, what kind of bias am I showing, that you can read into the context of the question, and you can go, oh, that's the kind of bias where, you know, I selected the sample incorrectly. Well, that's selection bias. If it's something where they participated in it and it's whether or not the participant chose to do it, that's voluntary, then that's participation bias, okay? So normally that happens, somebody only participates whenever they really love somebody or really hate somebody, right? So you got to watch out. So, and the answers tend to be skewed that direction. And the researcher bias is whenever the person who's running the study somehow manages to affect the outcome. So we have to watch out for that. All right, different types and levels of measurements for data. So number 9, we did a huge thing on different data types. So quantitative versus qualitative are the two big ones. And again, I'm not going to go into all of this. I'm just giving you a real quick rundown. You should know this stuff. And basically, of course, it's everything we've studied so far in the course. So qualitative versus quantitative, know the difference between that. Know what's discrete data and what's continuous data. Know the different levels, nominal versus ordinal for qualitative, discrete versus continuous here, and then over here under quantitative, remember that we have 2 more levels, which is ratio versus interval. So make sure you know the differences and make sure you can give me examples. For instance, when you're looking at something and you say, oh, I'm looking at it's 72 degrees outside Fahrenheit versus you think it's 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Okay, what's the difference in there? Well, there's a 3-degree difference. So there's a very definite interval in between there. It's a 3 degrees, and we can label that definitively. Okay, so there's definitely a difference, and there's definitely an interval. Okay, but the question is, can we call it ratio? So is there some proportion or fraction that I can set up here that will tell me, for instance, is 80 degrees really twice as hot as 40 degrees? And the answer is no. And remember that the way we know about ratio is there a true zero? So in other words, when I talk about degrees Fahrenheit, what does 0 mean? Does 0 mean no heat? No, that's not what 0 degrees Fahrenheit means. Okay? So in temperature like this, we don't have ratio measurements. Okay? So we got to watch out for that. We have intervals, but we don't have ratios. So go back and watch that video and make sure you can do that homework if you're not sure about the difference in those. I find that the interval versus the ratio is one of the areas where students struggle. An area where we would have true zero would be like if I was measuring something, weight. It is possible for me to look at something and say there's no weight on that scale right now. That's a true zero. But once I place this pin on that scale, then I'll say, oh, it's so many grams or so many ounces or whatever. Okay. Then I have a true zero. Then I can do proportionate reasoning, and then I have ratio measurements. Okay, so watch out for that. Okay, 10 is types of errors. Remember that there are random errors that just happen. They're mistakes. They're human errors, that kind of thing. And then there are things that are systematic errors that you find throughout your data. So there's 2 different differences there, random versus systematic. And make sure you know the difference in them and make sure you know how to deal with them. Maybe if I have a random error, I can just throw that one out. Or maybe I can go remeasure that particular data point, whatever it was, and figure it out. So, for instance, what if one person said that their very favorite color was lilac? Okay, and I'm trying to put these into color groups, and I'm like, what the heck is lilac? That's not any of the normal colors. Most people say blue, red, purple, whatever. Well, I need to either throw that data point out, right? It's a random data point. If it's truly an outlier, I might do that, but I could either go back and resurvey that student and say, look, you said lilac. When you can think about lilac, do you think that's more like a pink or more like a purple? You know, and get them to pick one of my categories, so to speak. I could do that. Or, you know, depending on what it is, something like that, I might just say, well, lilac is a shade of purple, which I think most people would agree with that. Or I might get other experts in the field to help me make that call. So before I just chunk a data point, I want to think about, oh, what about this? What about that? Can I get that data point? Can I fix it? If it was a tomato that we had said was 500 grams when it should have been 50, I can go back to that tomato and remeasure it, right? Reweigh it. So it depends on your study, it depends on your data and how you gathered it and whether you still have access to those subjects, the participants or not, that kind of stuff. Okay, remember that there were different types. There was absolute and there was relative. So this is where we started doing calculations. Absolute errors versus relative errors. Okay, So remember we started doing calculations, so go back and do that. And then the last section we talked about was using percentages and statistics, and it kind of works off of this absolute errors versus relative errors. We talked about absolute changes versus relative changes. Okay. So in other words, hey, what's the difference between those and how can I apply it? Can you do some problems with that? That we had some homework where we had to actually do problems with these changes in them, so make sure you can do that. Recall that all information from the course is fair game for the test. So if there's something that we covered that I didn't mention specifically in this thing, well, make sure you've covered it, make sure you've watched the videos, make sure you've done the homework. Yay! Normally there are quizzes for you to do. I'm not sure if I did any quizzes this semester. I don't think I've done any yet. But if there are, make sure you've done them and make sure you're okay with them, you understand the material. Okay, so that's the basic material. It's a long list. It's a lot of vocabulary, but that's the basic material that you need to be working on for exam number 1. Now, just a tiny bit about the formatting, and then I put sample questions into D2L, and you can work some of those out, right, and make sure you're good with them. The sample questions are not necessarily for credit, but depending on your class, I may have offered bonus credit or something like that toward a test. So work the sample problems for practice. If you're needing some questions, see me in office hours if you need help. I'm glad to help. But I have to know that you need help, so you have to reach out to me. So you can see me in office hours, shoot me emails. Okay, those kinds of things. So that's what we can work on. That's what you can work on to prepare for the test, including that material that I just said. Now, format of the exam. I tend to be on this first test because it's vocabulary and conceptual questions. Vocab and conceptual. I tend to have a variety of questions on the test. So, for instance, I might have a matching section. If I do, those are worth 1/2 of a point each. So they're not worth a lot. Don't spend so much time with them. Kind of go with your gut and move on. Okay, I tend to have multiple choice questions because it's easy for me to ask a conceptual question using multiple choice. If there are multiple choice questions, then they are worth 3 points each. And it'll say this on the test. It'll be on the test paper, but I'm trying to just kind of get you ramped up for the exam. There's likely to be true-false questions. If there are, then they're worth 3 points apiece. Let me talk to you for just a moment about these two categories. Okay, you need to read directions. Read the directions. Because sometimes my multiple choice questions, you may read them and go, well, both answer B and answer C work. Well, then you should circle both answer B and answer C. Sometimes there is more than one answer to a question. So therefore, the directions will say something like, circle all that apply. Okay, so don't just grab one and be like, I'm done with that question and move on. Okay, be sure that you read all of the choices and then circle all that apply, because sometimes it's more than B, or sometimes it could be D, all of the above, or sometimes it could be E, none of the above, or whatever. So just make sure you're reading. Okay, true, false, what about those guys? Well, true, false, it's not just enough to circle true or false and move on. You're not going to get but maybe a point's worth of credit out of a 3-point question. They will also say, justify your answer, or tell why or why not. Now, on a true-false question, if it's false and it's something like this, let's say, in a census, the researcher will gather a sample of the population to survey. Okay? Well, that's not true. A census does every member of the survey. So you can rewrite that and correct it. Okay? So for false, you can correct it. Or if it's something easy where you can just say, like if it's in a census, we look at some of the members of the population, you could mark out that sum and you can say, I look at every. You can just correct that one word and write it there on the test and move on, and that's fine. So that works for me. So you don't have to rewrite the entire thing. You can just correct the little thing. Now, it's sometimes harder when it's true, because if it's true and you have to justify why it's true, then you might need to give an example or support it or draw a picture or whatever. But sometimes the true ones are actually harder than the false ones, is what I'm getting at, because it's really easy to correct something that's wrong, but sometimes it's hard to support something that's correct. So watch out for that. Okay, so true, false, fill in the blank or short answer. Okay, and these are worth 4 points each if they're on there. Okay, and again, this would be something like, give an example of what a random error would be, and you would just give me a little short answer. It doesn't have to be a paragraph if it's a short answer, just 1 or 2 sentences, you'll be fine. Okay, fill in the answer short, or fill in the blank short answer, or calculations. And for this test, the calculations questions, 5 points each, will be margin of error questions, or trying to figure out absolute error versus relative error, or absolute change versus relative change. These are percentage questions a lot of the time on this test. So that's the last 2 or 3 sections and the 2 or 3 videos that we watched, that we made. So there's not a ton of that. So there you go. How does Dr. Webster grade? She grades on a percentage grade. So if there are 85 possible points, and you get 85 possible points on your test, then you get 100%. But if there are 85 possible points on this test, whenever I add all of this up, whatever it was, if there were 5 of these and 2 of those, I'll add up how many points there are. That tells me the possible. And this is your score, okay? If you get 85 out of 85, then congratulations, you got 100%. But if you only get 70 out of 85, then I'll figure out that percentage score, and it will be on your test so that you can see it. So this will be a great usage of our percentage knowledge so that we can do that. So I do use percentages for figuring out my calculations. If there are any bonus points, if you did the review and I gave you credit for bonus for that, or if there was a bonus question on the test, whatever, I find your percentage first and then add bonus on top. Because I don't want to take a percentage of the bonus. I want the bonus to be fully whatever that bonus points was. Well, however many bonus points you received. Okay. I'm trying to think what else I do. So I can tell you more about the test after I've graded it, how it goes. There is probably going to be a pen and paper portion of this exam. If you're doing a test online, then you're going to have to either print that out or handwrite them, and I made a whole video about how to do that, so I think we're good there. I'm not going to go too far in depth on that, but basically I am an adder, so I add points to make a total per page. Okay, and then I add the pages to get your score. your points. Okay. And then I'll take the percentage out of the possible. Okay. So I'll give you a percentage score, I should say, using the possible points. That's the way I generally do it, and it'll become more clear after we actually take the first test. Sometimes the first test is very nerve-wracking for people because you don't know how my tests are going to look, and you've never had me for a teacher or this or that, and you don't know how I'm going to score things. So I would just say, watch all the videos, do all the homework. I know I sound like a broken record here. Okay, do those things. You'll be prepared. Try not to be nervous. Try to just go in calmly and relaxed into your test. And I have found that the best way to do that is study, 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 be prepared. If you've done the homework, if you've kept up with the material, you should be okay. Don't stress out. All right, that's it. I tried to keep it short, about 30 minutes. Hope that helps you prepare for the test. If you have questions, let me know. Thanks.